Hello, Ada Wells, physical therapist, certified Pilates teacher here. And what I want to do is continue on my series of exercises I don't really care for and things I'd rather have you do. And today we're going to talk about that exercise that you might see at the gym, that little hip abduction, adduction, that hip adductor machine. It's the one where you see a person, they're sitting in there, they kind of place the weights in there, their legs are in kind of like it looks kind of like something you'd see in a gynecologist's office, and then they're essentially just moving in and out. I really dislike that exercise, and I'll tell you why. You know, when you're doing that, first of all, you're creating this movement, but you're not actively stabilizing the core. You're sitting there, your hips are in this flex position, the glutes are off, the core is off. You know, you're probably holding on with, you're holding on to the sides here, and once again, you're stacking up the weights, feeling all strong. But the thing is that it's not really, it's not serving you any good. So let's do something that's actually, if you're gonna waste your time doing some exercises, you're not wasting your time, but if you're gonna spend time doing exercises, you might as well do ones that are gonna be effective. So instead of sitting on that silly machine, I love using these are Pilates rings. And actually, if you don't have a Pilates ring, this can be done, even taking a belt and just tying it, just kind of looping it so that it's in a little bit of a circle. And what I'm going to do is a couple things. Now, you can't do this, well, I'll show you the version with the belt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and place my legs inside, let's scoot back here. I've got them inside this ring, okay? So as I'm in that position right now, I'm going to actually actively make sure that my pelvis is in a neutral position. So I'm not, my booty isn't out here, but it's not tucked either. It's sort of somewhere in between. And so I've got my sort of pelvic ring. I've got my ring down below. I've got my pelvic ring, my rib ring, my shoulder blade ring, the ring on the bottom of my skeleton or of my skull. Those rings are all stacked, okay? And what I'm going to start out with is a little weight shift, okay? Now, you should pretty immediately feel when you're doing this, we are working your hip abductors, your abductors, okay? Which is the thing you were trying to do sitting on that chair, pushing outward when you're resisting out, all right? But guess what? This is a lot more functional. You are standing up. Now, we're gonna make it a little more interesting. Now, we're gonna actually take that same movement and we're gonna pretend you're sitting in a chair. So I'm gonna come here and we're gonna sit in a chair as we're shifting the weight back and forth. And then we're going to come right back up. So now, once again, I'm adding this element of dynamic, I'm having to stabilize the spine, but I'm also having to create movement in the hip, all right? Now, if you don't want to do the weight shifting back and forth, just putting that pressure against that belt, if the circle is too wide, you might end up doing too much of a motion out with your knees. So there's sort of a fine, there's a little bit of fine tuning there so that when you're coming down into the squat, you're still able to keep your knees pretty much over your second toe. That'll vary slightly depending on people's structure, but roughly around over the second and third toe is usually pretty standard. So, so we're creating that kind of that force there as you're coming up and down into that little squat. Now, I can come here and I can just balance. And guess what? I'm working this hip adductor to kind of create the force out, and I'm also working like crazy quad, hip adductor. Everything's working over on this side to hold myself up. And so once again, it's like it doesn't take any more time to do than that other exercise that I described earlier, but a whole lot more effective. Okay, so if you wanted to work the inner thigh, now this is where the ring comes in handy, but if you have a ball, you can certainly use a ball to put between your legs. It's got to be wide enough to where when you're standing, your legs are about hip width apart. They might be a little wider, a little narrower, but roughly that. And same thing, I like to kind of go back and forth, work on this little weight shift. Now, what's nice with this ring is I can come up into that balanced position, and now actually I can integrate a little bit of this pulse. So now I'm actually creating stability and mobility, but I'm working those hip adductor muscles. And I'm working them, once again, in a way that is going to be more functional where I'm standing up. I mean, how many of us have to stand, balance, reach for something? So it's nice to be able to do that. Now you can also, I don't tend to do the squat so much. with the squeeze. And the reason why is people already have a tendency to sort of draw their knees in. I mean, unless you're bow-legged, maybe that would be a good thing. But for the most part, I would just pretty much stick with the squat part with when you have your legs sort of on the inside of this. And, but with both exercises, you can do that little weight shift back and forth. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas of how you can work the inner and the outer thighs without sitting in that silly machine. Okay, we'll see you next time.